Hello YouTubers, and welcome back to Go Figure Customs YouTube channel. I'm going to do a video here for you. It's not necessarily a tutorial, it's more of a buying guide. You've probably heard me talk about having an airbrush in the last few videos on tutorials, and even probably on the General Geekery podcast with my co-host JD. I've had it probably for about 1.5 years now. I am far from an expert, so this is not going to be a video on how to use an airbrush, but it's going to be more of a buying guide. I'm going to go through all the stuff that you need to get set up to have an airbrush and what you need to keep running. I've seen there's endless amounts of tutorials on YouTube on how to use an airbrush. And, maybe at some point in time, once I get good with it, I will do tutorials on how to use an airbrush. But one of the things that I noticed when I was looking for my airbrush is there's not a decent buying guide. What do I need? What do I really need to get started? And what do I need to keep going? So I'm going to put that together for you, because I got a couple buddies, Panama and JD, who are thinking about getting their own airbrush. So this is for them just as much as it is for anybody else that wants to stick their toe in getting an airbrush. And why would you want to get an airbrush? Well, number one, on the fancy end, there's all kinds of awesome painting techniques that you can only do with an airbrush, like fades, for example. But on the simpler end, you may have, if you follow my customizing Facebook page, you'll notice that I've been home from South America for just about a month now. And I'm working on my 16th figure since I've been home, 16th custom. I can pump one out in about a day now. And they look pretty decent, I must say. And the secret behind that really is the airbrush. What used to take me hours or even days to do, the first step in my painting is to lay down a base coat. Let me see if I got a better custom to show you here. Let's see here. So this is my Flying Scorpion. He's based off of the convention exclusive from the Sky Patrol set and the Brazilian version, which I don't remember the Brazilian name. But 90% of this is airbrushed. And I knocked him out in a day. And again, it's all, the speed of that is airbrushing. So if you're one of those people, and I've got friends that don't like to paint, like, I can't remember any off the top of my head. But I know I've got a lot of customizing buddies that don't like to paint. An airbrush is probably the answer for you, because it takes away a lot of that time-intensive, labor-intensive painting that's just annoying. Even for me, it's mind-numbing to me to lay down base coats, to sit here and paint base coats. I'll put on my music and just get something to drink, have a nice Red Bull, have some cookies, and just resign myself to painting a base coat. And it can take a long time to do that, hours, even days to do that. With an airbrush, it takes minutes. And the results are so much better because it puts down a thinner coat, so it doesn't get that melted crayon look that you get with hand painting base coats. So there's your reason why you want an airbrush. If you don't like painting, if you want smoother coats, airbrush is the way to go. So let's jump into it, and I'm going to show you what you need to get started and to keep you running on getting an airbrush. First off, you need an airbrush, right? So I am using an Iwata Neo airbrush. It's not the cheapest airbrush out there, but it's certainly not the most expensive either. It's kind of lower of middle of the range. I think with like just about anything, you get what you pay for. So I did not go with a cheaper airbrush, but I'm certainly not good enough to afford a really expensive airbrush. I used Badger airbrushes in high school, I never really got the hang of it. They are kind of difficult to use, but again, just getting started, you don't really need anything too complex. And it is a double action airbrush, meaning push down to get air and pull back to get paint. You want a double action airbrush. So whatever brand that you buy, you want one that's double action. So push down for air, pull back for paint. It gives you a lot more control over what you're doing. I went with Iwata because the YouTube channel Tested, which is Adam Savage's channel from Mythbusters, the guy that runs that, they put sort of a buying guide together for an airbrush, and I watched that, and they were using Iwata products. One of the comments on that video was that it was kind of a shitty buying guide because they were using top of the line stuff. I mean, like an Iwata compressor, which was like a $400 compressor. So one of the guys, somebody had commented that this was a shitty buying guide because it was recommending top of the line stuff that very few people could afford. I will preface that will annotate that by saying that, yeah, you are gonna spend a lot of money to get started on an airbrush, and that's like any hobby, photography, customizing. There is going to be a startup cost, but once you get going, it definitely levels out. So Iwata Neo airbrush, they're about $60 to $70 on Amazon. Here's a little trick for you: put it in your cart. Just put it in your cart and keep an eye on it. Prices go up, prices go down. When you see the prices fluctuate, just kind of keep a mental note of that. See what their lowest price is and watch it come up, watch it go down. When it hits that lowest price again, buy it then. That's what I did on my second one. I ruined the first one. So I'm going to show you some stuff to prevent you from ruining your airbrush. So, airbrush. I'm not going to unscrew it, but there is a quick release cap on here. So I'm not emptying my air tank, and I'll show you my compressor right after this. So it just clicks in there, and then I pull down and it pops off. So you want a quick release for, you need to know the specific diameter of your tubing, which is the next thing you need. You need air tubing to run from your airbrush to your compressor. And let's talk about compressors for a minute. So compressors, again, as I mentioned, harkening back to the Tested video, you can spend a lot of money on compressors, but you don't have to. I have a cheapo, like El Cheapo, I don't even think it had a brand name, is how cheap it is, and it runs great. But there are a couple of things that you need to be aware of when you're looking for a compressor. So, all right, so this is my compressor. Yeah, I can't even freaking read what that name brand is. I don't know what that is. So you can see I've got two tanks on it. The bottom one is the compressor itself, and then it fills the tank. So I don't have to, I can have the compressor on, but eventually it will fill up this tank, and then the compressor stops running because this tank is full, and it runs off of this tank for a while. Then that means you don't have to leave the compressor running the whole time. This right here, let me see if I get a better shot of that. Yeah, let me set it on the side. Right here, that's a moisture trap. If you live in a humid climate, you need to have a moisture trap on your compressor. I live in Colorado. The relative humidity is usually single digits to low teens. So it's not, it doesn't really do anything for me here in this climate. But if you do live in a humid climate, you definitely need a moisture trap on your compressor. So those were like the basic things that I bought when I got an airbrush. I bought an airbrush, I bought hose, and I bought a compressor. And that got me started. But then I ran into some problems really quickly of needing to thin out my paint and it clogging and stuff to clean it with. And suddenly I was like, geez, why didn't somebody tell me this before I bought this damn thing, that I was going to need all this other stuff? Well, let's do that. Let's look at all the other stuff that you really do need to have on hand once you start doing airbrushing to keep you running. That's the basic setup to get you started. You need a hose, you need a compressor, you need an airbrush. So here's the stuff that you need to keep it going well. Airbrush Cleaner. So I clean out my airbrush every time after I use it. Otherwise the paint clogs in there. You can't clean it out enough to get all of the paint from the previous color. So if like I'm using like a olive drab green and then I switch to white, now suddenly it's a really light color of olive drab green because there was still just a few molecules of that green in there to tint that white. So I rinse it out and scrub it out Neutrogena, liquid Neutrogena soap. If you got a girlfriend or a wife, chances are they probably have some of this stuff, or at least know of it and know where to get it. I get it at Target. This stuff I found out by accident because my wife uses it to remove her makeup. This stuff will take acrylic paint off your hands better than anything else that I've seen, except maybe lava. So I already had some of this stuff on hand because it gets the acrylic paint off my hands in a fantastic fashion. So this is what I clean my airbrush with. I take unscrew the back, unscrew the nut in the back, pull my needle out, I scrub down my needle, and I stick a little bit of this in there and I scrub it with the toothbrush, and then I rinse it out. I run a little bit of water through the airbrush, and then I run a cap full of this, or a cup. So that cup, a cup full of this through the airbrush every time I use it, just to keep it clean. That seems like it's a lot of work, labor intensive. And it kind of is, but it's kind of not when you think about how much time that you're going to save in painting, because it takes a couple minutes to lay down a base coat and it takes about 5 minutes to clean the airbrush and you're done. So 10 minutes versus a couple of hours of painting, suddenly it doesn't seem like the labor intensiveness of keeping it clean doesn't seem so daunting or so overwhelming anymore when you realize how quickly, how much time it will save you by doing this. While you probably do need a ventilated area to spray your paint in, a lot of the cleaners you don't want to spray into anywhere where you're going to be breathing. So I recommend a spray pot. You can spray all my cleaners into my spray pot. Again, all this stuff's available on Amazon or your local hobby store. I think I got this at my local hobby store. So a spray pot is, and it holds your airbrush too. So that's usually how I have mine set up on my customizing workspaces. I just store it on my spray pot. All right. And while you're spraying it, while you're using paint, let's talk about paint for a minute first. Citadel makes airbrush paint specifically for airbrush. Depending on the store you go to, I've seen some stores really get behind this line, really support it. They've got every color of the line and they've got multiple pots of it. And then one of the stores I go to, they're like, it didn't sell. We don't carry it anymore. It's very watery and you need to water your paint, not water, you need to thin it down. And that's something that you have to kind of, there is no rule of thumb for that, honestly. There is no, like, it needs to be 30% this or 10% that, or because it varies from paint to paint. So it's one of those things that you got to experience just by trial and error. And that's how I did it. So the Citadel paint's not too bad. The airbrush paint, I do run just regular Citadel paint through mine, which is fine. And I'll talk more about that, what you need to run through the airbrush with your paint in a minute. Tamiya, I've always been a big fan of Tamiya stuff, and I've done a video specifically on Tamiya paint that you can find on my channel here, because it is not the easiest paint to use if you're a beginner at painting. However, Tamiya runs through an airbrush like a dream. I fell in love with Tamiya all over again when I got my airbrush. They have such a unique line of realistic military colors that I just love Tamiya paints even more now, because they run fantastic through an airbrush. One of the other paints that I recently started using is called Scale 75. You can find these sets on Amazon, and I found it out of the blue. It suggested it to me, so I bought the flesh colored set, and it's a set of 8 colors, and I really like it. And it does need to be thinned out to be run through an airbrush. And there's a metallic set that I have. There's a bunch of other sets that I'd like to get, and they run about $36 for a set of 8 paints, which is not a bad price. Vallejo. Vallejo is the other brand. And Vallejo, I think, makes a specific line. I know they make a specific line of airbrush paint, because I have some airbrush paint here from Vallejo. So what do you need to do to thin out your paint? I've seen people say use Windex. I don't know about that. I haven't tried that. And I said there's not really a rule of thumb, but kind of the rule of thumb is you want it the consistency of milk, if that makes any sense. It didn't to me at first, but the longer that I've been doing this, I'd say that's probably about right. So what do I use to thin out my paints? I use 3 drops of Airbrush Flow Improver. I did not start off by using this because I didn't know this stuff existed until I saw a tutorial on it, and said this is something that you should be using, and it is something that you should be using. I use 3 drops of this, and the label came off. It's Vallejo Airbrush Thinner. And Citadel makes a airbrush thinner as well, but I think it just comes in tiny little pots. You want one of these big things. You only need 3 drops, but you can see this is almost half empty. So 3 drops of thinner, 3 drops of Airbrush Flow Improver, and then I have a specific long brush that I reach down in there into my pot and stir it up to mix the thinner and Flow Improver with the paint. If you just put the 6 drops of your medium in there and then put some paint, what will happen is the thinner and the Flow Improver will sit on the bottom or go around the paint, the glop of paint, and you'll just spray the thinner, and then your airbrush will clog up with the paint because it wasn't thinned down properly. So I put my 3 drops of thinner, 3 drops of Airbrush Flow Improver in there, and I stir it up until I get that right consistency. Some paints I've had to thin out a little bit more, like older Citadel paints that I've had for a longer time that have started to not quite harden out, or start to dry in the pot, and they're really thick like the base paints. I've had to add a couple more drops of thinner to thin them out. And that's what you need to get. Definitely need both of those to use your airbrush. One of the other things that I was recommended was Hopper's No. 9 gun oil. I run about 3 or 4 drops through this about every 5th time I use my airbrush to keep it lubricated. And I had a lot of problems with my first airbrush. It got clogged. I lost the nozzle. I'm pretty sure that's why it's screwed up. I need to buy another nozzle to see if I've fixed it, because I clogged my second one recently. I'll talk about that here in a second too. But I run about 3 or 4 drops through the airbrush about every 5th time I use it to keep it well lubricated. And I haven't had any problems aside from one clog since I've started using that particular mixture. So that is definitely something I highly recommend that you get. And if you do get clogs, you need these little, there's a set of wire bristles. They're like pipe cleaners, and you get these on Amazon. And this got my clog out of my airbrush earlier this week. And I have a set of these wire bristles too. You can see I've dropped that on the floor and they're now covered in dog hair. So I'm probably going to have to get another set of these. Otherwise, I'm going to clog my airbrush with dog hair. So, and they come in, see, I just dropped it again. There's a thicker set and then a thinner set. I really have never used the bigger brushes. It's the thinner brushes that you want to use. And honestly, since I've started using the gun oil and the Neutrogena soap, I really haven't had to use, haven't needed those brushes. So that's kind of a, maybe maybe you need it, maybe you don't, maybe you want it, maybe you don't, because I scrub it out with a toothbrush, just a soft bristle toothbrush when I'm cleaning it. And you know, maybe we'll hit that real quick too on how to clean it, because I did mention it, but I'll break it down and show you what you need to do to clean it. Let's see what else. Preparing and finishing your custom then. I highly recommend, always recommend priming your custom. I've done a couple videos on primer, reviewing different types of primer and why you need to primer. Definitely need to primer your customs. An airbrush puts on a real thin coat of paint, so you need primer for that paint to stick to. I like the Tamiya surface primer. The stuff I normally get is Tamiya surface primer, fine surface primer. My store didn't have it, so I had to get just the regular stuff. There's like a slightly noticeable difference between this regular stuff and the fine surface primer. I do like the fine surface primer better, but you know what? This works in a pinch, and you can hear it's almost empty. I just got this can a couple of days ago because I've been pumping out so many customs. I go through it so quickly. So that's to get your custom started. You need to prime it. Since your airbrush lays down a thin coat, you need to seal it then too. I used to use a sealant by Armory, which is the company that used to make the primer that I used, that I really liked, but I like the Tamiya primer better now. And I've moved away from the Armory sealant. It gave it kind of like a sugar cookie effect to it. It's really grainy. I don't want to say really grainy. It was like a fine grain, which looked really cool on like my Navy SEAL customs. But anything else, it did not look good on, and it did not age well, quite honestly. So what I'm using right now, on the recommendation of one of the places I get paint, is Tester's Spray Lacquer Clear Coat, and I think they also call it Dull Coat. I'm not sure if the Dull Coat is the same stuff as this stuff, but I really like the finish that I get with that. I like my customs to have a matte finish, so not shiny. And I think this is more, it gives it more of a semi-gloss. So it's not quite matte, but it's not quite gloss. And I actually like this better. But you're gonna need some sealant to seal your airbrushed custom with, because as I found out really quickly, the airbrush puts on a very fine coat of paint and it rubs off really easily. So you need to seal your paint, your custom, once you're done with it. That's about all you need to get started. I know that seems like a lot. You can watch this video over and over and over again, but this is a good buying guide on what you need to get started and what you need to keep running. One last thing, let's look at the airbrush and I'll show you how to break it down real quick. So what I do to clean it every time, I unscrew the cap. There's a little nut here. Take the nut off. I take the needle out. Ooh, still hooked up to the tank. And I take the cup off. I scrub my needle down, and then look at it very closely. I can't show it very well on the video here, but you've got to put it up against like your skin, because paint will tend to dry and on the tip of your needle, like just like molecules. And if you're using bright colors, it's really easy to see, but you need to get your needle cleaned very well. And then I put a little bit of that Neutrogena soap in here, and I scrub it in, and I scrub the nozzle. And that is about all I need to do to keep it clean, are just those steps right there. Now, if it does get clogged, you can unscrew the nozzle, and this is actually 2 pieces, cap, and then your nozzle. You can see that's a very, very fine hole there. And is there stuff in there? I don't know. Let's run one of those cleaners through, one of the pipe cleaners through it. I think it was just some water in there. But that's what you need these for, is to get through that little tiny hole in there to get out paint clogs. Because I had orange paint clog up in that. Then it comes with a little wrench for you to take the inside nozzle off. Oh, this is all gunked up in here. And this is why we put a little gun oil on this. Just to keep it well lubricated. There we go. Keep it clean. You don't want to, you want everything just hand tight. You don't want to over tighten stuff. Okay. And I'm not going to take off that tiny nozzle because, like I said, I got to get a wrench out for that. And it comes with the little wrench. And 99 times out of 100, you don't need to take that off unless it really becomes clogged and you can't get it clean with the method I just described. Then you need to break it down and do a deep cleaning. And let's put that back together. And somebody suggested that running acetone through it once in a while would help keep the paint clogs out of there. There are rubber rings in there. I don't know if that acetone will eat away those rings, but just I had some for I was using it for paintbrush cleaner, so I had some on hand. So to reassemble it, I just put those 2 pieces back, screwed those 2 pieces together, and then screwed it back on the body. I just slide the needle back in there, and it will stop. Slide the nut back on, and the trigger assembly comes out, and this whole part comes out too. But like I said, you don't, 99 times out of 100, you don't need to take this all apart to clean it. Just taking the needle out and scrubbing where the paint goes in and where the paint comes out is enough to get it clean. And then I do clean out my cup every time too, because paint will stick in there. So you don't want dried paint flaking off and becoming like an embolism into your airbrush. Screw the cap back on, or the cup back on. Screw the back on, and you're good to go. It's about time to run some of those through. I don't really want to breathe gun oil, so I'm going to spray it in my spray pot. Good deal. And that is what you need to, number 1, get started with an airbrush. So there's your buying guide, and that's what you need to keep it running, to keep it clean. That's the biggest tip I got for you, is keeping that airbrush clean. thin down your paints enough. Goddamn dogs. Thin down your paints, and that should hopefully, that will keep your airbrush from clogging 99 times out of 100. But paints like yellow, orange, white, those are hard paints to paint no matter what. And orange in particular, I friggin' hate orange, but I did in my female alley viper, and I did it in traditional colors, so it had to be orange, and sure as fuck it clogged up. But and I thought it was ruined. I'm like, shit, it ruined another airbrush. But I was able to deep clean it and get that clot of paint out of there, and we're fine. So that's what you need to get started. That's what you need to keep going. Hopefully that will be helpful for you. If you got any tips or tricks or other things that you need to, you think might be good for a startup buying guide, put them in the comments below. As always, do that fun social media stuff. Like, share, subscribe, comment, all that fun social media stuff. And thanks for watching.